The contracts were already printed when I walked into the boardroom. My own daughter, Lorna, sat at the head of the table as if the company were hers. Across from her, my grandson Colton lounged back in a designer jacket, spinning my old fountain pen between his fingers. "Nana," he said, voice slick, "we're streamlining. It's time you retire your quaint methods." Beside him, Gavin, Lorna's husband and self-proclaimed strategic visionary, pushed a folder toward me. Inside, a new operating agreement stripped me of voting rights. Colton chuckled. "Don't worry, we'll keep your name on the letterhead. Legacy branding cells." For a moment, I heard the same hum the silos made before a storm. I closed the folder slowly. "You've already signed this, haven't you?" Gavin smiled. "Unanimously. We just need your signature to keep things clean." My throat tightened, but my voice didn't tremble. Clean. How fitting. That was the day I stopped being their safety net. My name is Ruth Hale. I'm 68 years old, and I built this company from dirt and debt. That afternoon, I decided to teach them what happens when you confuse wisdom with weakness. After the meeting, I returned to my office, locked the door, and pulled out the leather ledger I'd kept since 1983. Inside were my husband's signatures, every amendment, and one clause Gavin never bothered to read. The stewardship rules stated no structural changes without a certified apprentice completing a full-year operating audit. I called the company attorney, Miles Trent, a quiet man with loyalty carved from gratitude. Years ago, I'd helped his family keep their farm when the banks circled like vultures. "They're trying to push me out," I said. "Then invoke the clause," he replied. "It's still valid." I had a shield. But I also needed a student to choose. The irony wasn't lost on me. Colton had spent the last 5 years attending business conferences and networking events, learning buzzwords instead of business. He'd never worked a harvest season, never balanced a ledger with calloused hands, never understood that numbers on a screen represented real people with real bills. Now I would make him learn. Colton swaggered into my office the next morning, holding one of my old index cards. "Rule number 3 says, own the dirt under your revenue." "What is this, a farm joke?" I smiled faintly. "A survival plan." He smirked. "Your rules built a mom-and-pop operation. We're building empires." I slid the folder toward him. "Then you'll need to survive 1 year following these before touching the reins." He laughed, signing the apprentice form without reading it. "Whatever keeps you happy, Nana." His signature was careless, rushed. The same way he approached everything. 1 full year, I repeated. "Every rule. Every day." Sure, he said, already halfway out the door. He had just signed the contract that would undo him. I watched him leave, remembering the boy who used to help me count grain trucks on summer afternoons. Somewhere between private schools and trust funds, that boy had disappeared. Maybe this year would bring him back. I assigned him the smallest division, a neglected grain elevator by the state line, bleeding cash for 18 months. The building was old, the equipment older, and the staff bitter from years of being ignored by corporate. "Your laboratory," I said. "If you can turn this unit profitable by next harvest, the board reinstates the modernization plan." Gavin smirked. "We'll have it flipped in 6 months." I just nodded. Follow the rules. Every one of them. They thought I'd handed them failure. I'd actually handed them the truth. The outpost sat on 40 acres of flat land near the county line. Most people saw it as a liability. I saw it as the last place where someone could still learn what my husband taught me decades ago. That real wealth isn't built on spreadsheets. It's built on understanding the ground beneath your feet. Colton would either learn that lesson or destroy himself trying to avoid it. Rule number 1 said cash doesn't lie. 2 weeks later, I checked the ledgers. Colton's team had spent $18,000 on digital dashboards but hadn't paid the millworkers. I summoned him. "You can't run numbers on unpaid people," I said. He rolled his eyes. "We're automating payroll." "Then automate your lunch, because no one's working if you keep this up." He laughed then. But laughter doesn't balance accounts. The next morning, I received a call from the shift supervisor. 3 workers had walked off the job. 2 more threatened to follow. The grain delivery schedule was already behind by 4 days. I didn't intervene. I sent Colton a single text message containing rule number 1. He responded with a thumbs up emoji. That told me everything I needed to know. He still thought this was a game. He believed charm and confidence could replace competence. The silos would teach him otherwise. One dawn, I drove out to the outpost unannounced. Silos half full, conveyors silent. Workers smoking by the trucks, muttering about late pay. Colton wasn't there, just invoices with his digital signature. I photographed everything. The rust on the conveyor belts. The broken safety railing on the catwalk. The weeds growing through cracks in the loading platform. Evidence of neglect that no dashboard could hide. One worker, an older man named Warren, approached me cautiously. "Mrs. Hale, we haven't seen the young Mr. Colton in 5 days. Is he still in charge here?" "He is," I said. "For now." Warren nodded slowly. "Then maybe you should tell him that computers don't load grain trucks." That night, I mailed Colton a single sheet containing rule number 4. Walk the ground once a week. He didn't understand it yet. But the ground was about to teach him. Gavin hosted a press event bragging about data-led transformation. He put Colton front and center, calling him the face of our future. I watched from the back, silent. Then a journalist asked, "What about the unpaid vendors?" Colton froze. Gavin's smile cracked. "That's a temporary accounting issue," Gavin said smoothly. "Being resolved this week." But I saw the reporter's eyes narrow. She was young, hungry for a real story. The kind who wouldn't let vague answers satisfy her curiosity. After the event, I approached her in the parking lot. "Betty Chen, right? You covered the Morrison equipment bankruptcy last year." She nodded. "Mrs. Hale. I didn't expect to see you here." I handed her a business card. "Call me if you want the full story about what's happening at the State Line outpost." The cracks would spread faster than they expected. A banker called 2 days later. "Mrs. Hale, did you authorize new collateralization of Hale Logistics assets?" I nearly dropped the receiver. Gavin had mortgaged part of the land as security for a business loan. "No," I said. "Cancel immediately." She hesitated. He used his temporary managing authority. Temporary, yes. But illegal under the stewardship clause. "Send me the paperwork," I said calmly. "All of it." After I hung up, I sat in silence for several minutes. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was Gavin trying to hollow out the company from the inside, stripping assets to fund whatever scheme he'd cooked up next. I finally had leverage. More importantly, I had proof that they weren't just incompetent. They were actively harmful. I called Miles Trent again. This time, his tone shifted from cautious to serious when I explained what Gavin had done. I hired a private auditor under a non-disclosure clause. Within a week, she found missing payments, falsified maintenance reports, and an unreported loan to a shell company tied to Gavin's brother. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I built a wall of evidence instead. Every lie had a receipt. The auditor, a sharp woman named Patricia Yoon, delivered her findings in a plain brown folder. No drama, just facts. The kind of facts that couldn't be argued away with charm or excuses. "Mrs. Hale, this is fraud," she said quietly. "Multiple counts." "I know. You could press charges immediately." I shook my head. "Not yet. My grandson is still learning. If I destroy his father-in-law now, he'll never understand why these rules exist." Patricia looked at me with something close to admiration. "You're playing a long game." "I'm teaching a lesson that has to stick." Colton stormed into my house one evening. "You're sabotaging me. You've got staff spying on me." I set down my teacup. "You're sabotaging yourself." He slammed the old ledger onto the table. "These stupid rules don't work anymore." I met his glare. "They work fine. You just haven't earned the right to bend them." His face flushed red. "You don't understand modern business." "I understand that your workers haven't been paid on time in 3 weeks. I understand that you've spent more time in conference rooms than on the actual grounds. I understand that you're failing. I'm implementing systems. You're ignoring people." He stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched. For a moment, I thought he might actually listen. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and whatever vulnerability had flickered across his face disappeared. "You'll see," he muttered, heading for the door. The next morning, I'd find out what breaking the rules really cost. Heavy rain collapsed part of the silo roof. Insurance wouldn't cover preventable neglect. Estimated loss was $1.2 million. Gavin blamed me for budget strangling. Colton stared at the numbers, pale. Rule number 2 said fix before it breaks. He hadn't. The collapse happened at 3 in the morning. By the time I arrived at dawn, emergency crews had cordoned off the area. Grain spilled across the muddy ground, ruined and unsalvageable. Warren stood nearby, arms crossed. "We reported that roof leak 6 weeks ago. Mr. Colton said it wasn't a priority." I nodded. "I know. This could have killed someone." "I know that too." Colton arrived an hour later, designer boots immediately caked in mud. He looked at the wreckage and then at me. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The harvest season was 6 weeks away. The unpaid staff walked out 3 days after the collapse. Local news picked it up. "Family feud in Heir Logistics," the headline read. Lorna called, furious. "You've humiliated us." "No," I said. "Your negligence did." Betty Chen's article was thorough and damning. She'd interviewed 7 workers, all with similar stories. Late paychecks, ignored safety concerns, absentee management. The comment section filled with people sharing their own experiences with corporate incompetence. Reputation was slipping through their manicured fingers. That evening, Gavin appeared on a local business show, trying to spin the narrative. He talked about growing pains and transition periods. He smiled his calculated smile. But the host had done her homework. She asked about the mortgaged land. She asked about the unpaid vendors. She asked where Colton was during the roof collapse. Gavin's answers grew shorter, sharper. His smile thinned. I watched from home, sipping tea, watching karma work. A rival firm offered to buy the failing division for pennies on the dollar. Gavin urged Colton to sell and cut losses. Colton hesitated. For the first time, doubt flickered behind his arrogance. I said nothing, just left rule number 5 on his desk. Never sell in panic. Wait for clarity. He called me that evening. "Nana, what if this is the right move? What if I'm just throwing good money after bad? Are you asking my opinion or my permission?" Silence. "Because if you're asking my opinion, I'd say you haven't stayed long enough to know what you're selling. You've been managing from a distance. You don't know what assets you actually have. The place is falling apart. Parts of it, yes. But falling apart isn't the same as worthless." He hung up without saying goodbye. But the next morning, he declined the rival firm's offer. Clarity would come with a map. While reviewing old property records in my office, Colton found my handwritten notes about the rail spur behind the grain yard. Buried line items showed an old lease to a defunct short-line railroad company. "Nana, what is this?" I looked up from my desk. "What does it look like?" "It looks like we own a railroad track." "We own the land under a railroad track. There's a difference." He studied the map, tracing the faded lines with his finger. "This connects to the main corridor." "It used to. Could it again?" I smiled. "That depends. Are you willing to do the work to find out?" For the first time in months, I saw genuine curiosity in his eyes instead of impatience. A forgotten asset that could change everything. He spent the next 2 days tracking down records, making calls, visiting the county clerk's office. No assistance, no delegating. Just him and a problem he actually cared about solving. He drove out to meet the retired rail foreman listed on the deed. The man laughed when Colton explained why he'd come. "That spur connects to the new industrial corridor. If you fix it, you'll have the only direct loading route in the county." Colton blinked. "You're serious?" "Serious enough to regret not buying it myself when I had the chance." The foreman, a weathered man named Douglas, walked Colton along the overgrown tracks. "See that intersection? That's where the county's building the new processing plants. Every company there will need grain transport. Right now, they're all trucking it 40 miles out of their way." Why hasn't anyone else figured this out? Douglas chuckled. Because they're too busy looking at screens instead of maps. For the first time, Colton saw the wisdom he'd mocked. He called me from his truck, voice different. Quieter. Nana, can I use some of the emergency fund? I approved it without hesitation. He hired welders, engineers, and old farmers who remembered how to fix rail. For the first time, he worked until his hands blistered. Sweat teaches faster than lectures. I drove out to the site on a Saturday morning. Colton was there in jeans and a work shirt, both filthy, helping a crew remove rotted railroad ties. His expensive watch was gone, probably broken or lost. Warren worked beside him, offering quiet instructions. You're holding the pry bar wrong, Warren said. Angle it like this. Colton adjusted his grip, tried again. The tie shifted. There you go. I watched for 20 minutes before Colton noticed me. He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead with his arm. Nana. Don't stop on my account. He nodded, returning to work. I stayed for an hour, saying nothing, just observing. The crew accepted him now. Not because he was the boss's grandson, but because he was working alongside them, learning their language. When the spur reopened, a regional co-op signed a loading contract. Cash flow turned positive. Workers returned. Gavin sneered. A fluke. I knew better. The first shipment rolled out on a Tuesday morning. Colton stood on the platform, watching grain flow into railcars bound for processing plants 60 miles south. The efficiency was obvious. What used to require a dozen trucks now moved on a single train. The co-op's manager shook Colton's hand. You've given us back 3 hours per delivery. That's money. Within 2 weeks, 3 more companies requested meetings. Lorna called me, confused. Mother, what's happening out there? Colton's actually making money. He's following the rules. But Gavin said the rules were outdated. Gavin hasn't been right about much lately, has he? She didn't answer. The fluke had a multiplier coming, but they couldn't see it yet. A utility survey crew discovered a fiber trunk running under the same strip of land. A tech company offered a long-term lease for conduit rights. Colton nearly cried. Nana, did you know this was here? I smiled. I know the value of ground you haven't sold. The lease offer was substantial. $25,000 per month for 15 years. Guaranteed revenue that had nothing to do with grain prices or harvest yields. Why didn't you tell me? Colton asked. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was just an old woman clinging to worthless land? He looked down. I would have thought you were wrong. Exactly. Some lessons can't be told. They have to be discovered. The fiber lease transformed the division's financial picture overnight. Suddenly, the failing outpost showed more profit potential than half the company's established operations. Gavin didn't see it coming. Gavin tried to reassert control, filing to remove Colton as apprentice for underperformance. But the 12-month rule wasn't complete, and the profit chart now favored Colton. The board split. It was time to show the evidence. Miles Trent prepared the presentation with quiet efficiency. Charts, bank statements, email trails. Patricia Yoon's audit findings compiled into an undeniable narrative of fraud. Are you sure about this? Miles asked. Once you present this, there's no going back. I've been sure since the day Gavin mortgaged land that wasn't his to leverage. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I spent the weekend reviewing every document, every piece of evidence. Not because I doubted the facts, but because I needed to be prepared for Lorna's reaction. She was still my daughter. But she'd chosen to stand beside a man who'd tried to destroy everything I'd built. In the board meeting, I laid out the audit. Forged loans, hidden debts, shell payments. Miles presented affidavits from vendors Gavin had stiffed. Lorna whispered, Mother, please don't. I already did. Gavin's face went from confident to confused to cornered in the span of 5 minutes. He tried to interrupt, to explain, to redirect. But the numbers didn't lie. One board member, a banker who'd known my husband, spoke first. This is fraud. Clear, prosecutable fraud. Another member, younger and more sympathetic to Gavin's modernization pitch, looked uncomfortable. "Can we resolve this privately?" "No," I said firmly. "Because private resolution teaches nothing. My grandson needs to see what happens when ambition replaces integrity." Gavin stood abruptly. "You vindictive old woman. You've been planning this from the start." "I've been documenting the truth. There's a difference." Gavin's empire of charm crumbled before his eyes. Local news broke the story by evening. Investors fled Gavin's consulting firm. The same papers that praised his modernization now printed his resignation. Colton stood beside me, silent, humbled. Betty Chen's follow-up article was titled, "How One Heir Learned the Hard Way." It detailed Colton's journey from entitled grandson to legitimate operator. She interviewed Warren and other workers who praised his transformation. "He showed up," Warren told the reporter. "That's all we wanted. Someone who actually cared." The article went viral in business circles. People shared it with comments about leadership and accountability. Some criticized me for being too harsh. Others praised the lesson. I didn't care about the opinions. I cared that Colton was reading the article carefully, understanding what he'd almost become. He'd gained everything by losing his ego. That evening, he came to my house without calling first. We sat on the porch, watching fireflies. "I'm sorry, Nana." "I know." A Wall Street group offered to buy Heir Logistics for 9 figures. Colton looked at me. "What would you do?" "Follow rule number 10. Never sell what still teaches you." He declined the offer. The stock soared after the rail fiber lease announcement became public. Industry analysts called it a hidden gem. Financial blogs wrote case studies about undervalued rural assets. The Wall Street Group increased their offer by 30%. Colton declined again. "Why?" a board member asked during a conference call. "Because my grandmother built something worth more than money," Colton said. "She built a system that works. I'm not selling that for a payout." For once, he didn't need my correction. The board approved his decision unanimously. Gavin, now unemployed and facing civil suits, sent angry emails that went unanswered. Lorna filed for divorce 3 months later, moving into a small apartment downtown. She called me once, crying, apologizing. "I should have listened." "Yes, you should have." 1 year to the day, the auditor certified the division's turnaround. Profit margins tripled from the previous year. At the celebration, Colton raised a glass. For the rules I didn't understand, and the woman who never gave up on me. The entire staff applauded. Warren, now promoted to operations manager, nodded at me from across the room. But one final truth remained untold. After the speeches, after the cake, after most people had left, Colton approached me. "Nana, I want to read the original partnership agreement. The one from when you and Grandpa started this." I handed him the ledger. "It's all in there." He sat at my kitchen table, reading slowly. I made tea, giving him time. When he reached the sealed envelope in the back, he looked up. "What's this?" "Your grandfather's final amendment." "Open it." His hands trembled as he broke the seal. Inside, a single page in my husband's careful handwriting stated when the apprentice completes the year, transfer 51% voting rights to the steward, not the heir. Colton looked up, stunned. "Nana, this means you still control everything." I smiled. "No. It means you've earned it." I slid a notarized document across the table. Transfer of voting rights, dated that morning, signed by me and witnessed by Miles Trent. "You followed the rules. You learned the lessons. You proved that wisdom matters more than flash. The company is yours now, truly yours." He couldn't speak. Just held the paper, reading it over and over. "Your grandfather wrote that clause because he knew the difference between inheritance and earning. You've earned this, Colton. Don't forget how." His billion-dollar company didn't come from inheritance. It came from discipline. That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the familiar hum of the silos. The same sound that had filled 40 years of my life. The sound of work, of harvest, of things built to last. Today, I sit on the farmhouse porch with the ledger closed beside me. The company is thriving, the land preserved, and Colton runs it with humility carved by sweat and failure and redemption. He visits every Sunday, never late, never boasting. "You were right, Nana," he says softly. "Old rules never die. They just get proven." I sip my tea, watching the silos glow gold in the sunset. The same sunset I watched with my husband 40 years ago when we were young and poor and determined. Somewhere in the fields, a train whistle sounds. The rail spur carries grain toward the industrial corridor, feeding the growth we built together. The fiber lines beneath the soil pulse with data, invisible wealth running through dirt my husband's hands once turned. Strength isn't in changing the rules. It's in living by the ones that outlast greed. Colton's children visit now, running through the same fields where he once played. They're learning the rules too, written on new index cards in their grandfather's careful print. The spoiled heir who mocked my wisdom became rich only because I refused to bend. And that's a legacy worth more than any boardroom victory.